All right, Mr. Dye.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here today. I know we're a smaller group, one, because these grade levels are a little bit smaller. 7th grade will only have 2 sections. 6th grade will have 3 sections. But the information is definitely pertinent for the parents and the students for these grade levels. Now, for those parents and community members who this time isn't the best for them, this recording will be posted on our website and shared with them so they can also receive that information. Now, as I kind of pour information on you with respect to our curriculum, I'd love for you to take notes about questions that you have, or put your questions in the chat so that when I get toward the end, we're just gonna open it up to more interactivity, allow you to answer your specific questions and I can answer them, because I'm sure you have some great questions for me, and those will also be shared with our parents. So without further ado, I actually prepared a little presentation to go along with our curricular information so that you don't have to stare at me the whole time. Let me do the share screen. All right, let's do that. So I'll start briefly with something that I spoke about before, kind of the educational stages within the classical education methodology. Now, the 6th graders are kind of finishing up in an outpouring of acquisition of content and specific skills. So I know there's a little trepidation with our 6th grade and 7th grade parents and students coming into something brand new. And that's totally understandable. We do this all the time. If we weren't able to do that successfully, we just start with kindergartners and we'd walk them through that process. So we have a very intentional way of how do 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds who maybe have not thought about the really intentional things that we're hoping to put in front of them over these next couple of years, how do we help them to start to think about that? Start to think about objective truth, philosophical realism, being good people in that moral formation and developing an aesthetic sensibility. So have the understanding that all of these 6th graders and 7th graders are going to be relatively new to this process, and our teachers are really good at supporting them. We even have specific academic intervention support for students who also need that, because we understand human development with respect to the academic acquisition as well. And we're not going to come in assuming this high level of academic rigor while saying we're not necessarily going to lower our standards. We're going to support our students in reaching those standards. Anyway, so the 6th graders are kind of finishing up a lot of this acquisition of specific skill, where the 7th graders are starting to expound upon that, starting the dialogue and the argument and the logic process. Organizationally, 6th grade is more of a homeroom model, more self-contained. Yes, the teachers start to departmentalize, but it's 7th grade where it looks like a middle school. They'll have 6 55-minute periods. They'll have transition times where they're going through their schedule. And I'll walk through a schedule with you at the end, but that's a really different aspect between the 6th graders and the 7th graders, where we're developing their responsibility and their autonomy and treating them as, age appropriate, as those 7th graders should be. We're not treating them like kindergartners in a fully self-contained homeroom model. We're starting to give them more of that responsibility and take the things that they've learned and start to think independently and holistically. So this is specifically for 6th grade. The 7th graders kind of leave the phonics behind. They're more independent readers at that point. Now the 6th graders finish this process. Kindergarten all the way through 6th grade do Spalding phonics, even if they've never done it before. And the 6th graders really are kind of finishing it up, even if they haven't done that before. So we're going very quickly back to the beginning of manuscript handwriting and cursive handwriting, because it's good for them and it teaches them order and structure, and back to the beginning of initial phonemic awareness. And of course, after we've inculcated them in all of this wonderful phonics very quickly, even the 6th graders, we then jump to what's developmentally appropriate for them. So I'm going to be a little bit more practical. So these are some of the tools that we use even in 6th grade. We go back to individual phonemic awareness, even though those students are, for the most part, being able to fluently read. This aspect of how do I learn vocabulary and spelling and take that into a more independent role within my literature. Going back to review these very basic skills often makes them extraordinarily successful. So every student has, in 6th grade, forgive me, this is only 6th grade. I'll talk a little bit more about 7th grade in a minute. 6th grade have these blue notebooks that they're writing their spelling words in. Now, they don't just memorize their spelling words. Yes, they have a spelling test or quiz at the end of each week, but it's not about memorization. It's about encoding and decoding and putting words together from the very beginning, very basic, and then getting, okay, what's appropriate for a 6th grader to now take that information and to see that the English language, even though it looks like a hodgepodge of lots of different languages put together, it is ordered and knowable, and there are specific phonograms and rules that we can use to be successful once they transition out of that. So this is an example of one of their blue notebooks, maybe at the very beginning of the year for 6th grade, maybe in those first couple weeks. Even the kindergartners do these words. It starts very, very basic, where they're just doing individual phonogram sounds and they're learning why the English language is ordered in this way. So the first word, which the Ayers list goes in order of verbal speech, the words most often used in verbal speech. Interestingly enough, the first word is me. Maybe that says something about our culture. But they'll say base word, me, syllables, me, sounds, e, and then they pick up their pencil and they write it. And they think as a group, are all of these phonograms saying what they normally say? And in the first word, it doesn't. E usually says eh. So they're going to mark it and say there's a rule that says E may say E at the end of a syllable. And it's a lot, and there are 29 rules and lots of markings, but we very quickly bring them through this process to then say, okay, these words are pretty easy, 6th graders. You probably already know how to spell them, but you might not know why they are spelled this way. You might not know why there are 2 L's at the end of will. You might not know why there's an E at the end of chance. There are very specific reasons why words are ordered in this way. So we very quickly go through that process. And once they're ready, we move on to cursive, and then we get to like 6th grade words, because these are kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade words, but they need this foundation of, I need to do it in a very decodable and easy way, so that when I get to words like, I don't know, onomatopoeia, diligence, that they, oh, I've seen these rules, I can put them in syllables, and now I can do that independently. So that's kind of the culmination of our Spalding phonics program, all the way from kindergarten through 6th grade, even though these 6th graders are going to be brand new to it. So we kind of finish up that process of that orderly instruction before moving them independently into their literature and composition in 7th grade. So the next piece of language arts is our literature study. So on the left side of the screen, we have 6th grade, and on the right side of the screen, we have 7th grade. Now, even with these students in 6th and 7th grade, these books might not be most appropriate for practicing reading fluency. These books might be a little bit too hard for them. So what we often do with these books is they are literature studies in the class for the class. So the teacher and the students are working through them together. They're talking about plot and setting and vocabulary and comprehension strategies. These books are not for reading practice, developing fluency in reading, because even though 6th and 7th graders are still working on those things, but we want to put the best literature, the most morally forming literature that have stood the test of time in front of them. So with that being said, those grade levels also practice their reading fluency alongside their literature. So maybe the 6th graders do book clubs, where they are grouped together with other students that are maybe at their reading level, and saying like, well, Treasure Island, that's a tough book. So we're going to read Indian in the Cupboard as a small group instruction with grade level peers, saying this is for reading practice, where my classics to keep is more of my literature study. So making sure that we're supporting our students coming in and saying, yeah, we're going to do this really excellent literature program, this really rigorous and structured program, while saying at the same time, this is not necessarily appropriate for individual reading practice. Now, if you have specific questions about that, make sure to jot them down or put them in the chat so I can address them. But I want to continue through this language arts thread. So we talked a little bit about phonics. There's our literature and reading program. And writing. So As we have gone through this process with our students and making sure that we're giving them the best of the foundational information to be successful, we have partnered with curricula that allows us to do that. So in 6th and 7th grade for new schools, we do what's on the left. Now, mature schools transitioned into this more classical approach to English composition and grammar, because in 7th grade, they just have a lit comp class, literature and composition class, where they do all of that stuff. Seminar, reading books, grammar, writing, all together. Now, in order to transition them into what we hope that is to come, we have a very structured grammar and writing program that helps them to be successful. So well-ordered language is foundational to this aspect of grammar and helping students to see why words do what they do in context, in literature or passages or sentences. So students are dissecting sentences and saying, why would an author or a writer use these particular words for the function that they're doing? So of course, learning nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs and predicates and phrases and saying, those are only things that help us to do the better thing. Like, it's not just memorize these words and definitions, it's coming to an understanding of why language is put together the way that it is, so that they can become orderly thinkers themselves and use those things. Similarly, our writing program, which is at the top of the middle, Institute for Excellence in Writing, is extraordinarily structured to help students get to the point where they can do that. Because writing is very difficult, especially when we're jumping right into the middle in 6th and 7th grade. Maybe a kindergartner who's gone a lot through that process, by the time they get to 6th and 7th grade, will have the structure and style to be able to do that independently. But we need to make sure that we're not inappropriately jumping right in and saying like, yeah, do it, you're ready. Probably not. And if you are, we don't even know that. So going back to the basics of looking through keyword outlines and how do I style my writing to be effective, using words that they use this term called dress ups. So using better words within their writing, not using particular words that often students will use in speech or in their writing because they don't have the skills and the foundation to do it better. So going back to providing that structure so that when they become 8th, 9th, 10th grade, and we're asking them to create or to write something out of what's within them, they have the good stuff within them and they're able to do that. But not assuming coming in that they're already ready to do that. So let's transition into talking about math. So going through, you might have heard me talk about our Singapore math curriculum, the CPA approach, going back to concrete things, helping students come to this numeracy acquisition of mathematics as communicating about real life. It's not just abstract, it's not just conceptual, it's not just memorize an algorithm and the steps to do the thing that we're asking them to do. It's helping them come to an understanding that the world is ordered and knowable, and math helps us to see that. Now, 6th grade takes a very foundational approach to going back to everything they might have learned or not learned through kindergarten and 5th grade. So kindergarten through 5th grade is our Singapore math curriculum. And 6th grade is almost this very, very deep dive of the foundations of mathematics that they would have gotten throughout our program through Singapore Mathematics, or might not have for those new students. So we're going back to a lot of these cyclical content areas of place value and numeracy and fractions and decimals and percentages, and helping students acquire the right skills and the conceptual idea of it being real in reality before going on to pre-algebra. Now, you might be wondering, why does Great Hearts do pre-algebra in 7th grade, where other programs might have already done pre-algebra or already going into algebra 1? Well, we found that if we do this very, very deep dive into the concepts of pre-algebraic functions over the course of 7th grade, even with students who might have been rushed through that process already, they're much, much more successful in algebra 1, where we found other schools, campuses, ways of thinking with the mathematical processes kind of rush students through that. Pre-algebra, algebra 1, Euclidean geometry, all the way through A and B calculus in high school. Well, they've done it, and it's almost been like a fire hose of information, but they don't have the basic understanding of what this thing is communicating about in reality. Like, I can do it, I can do these algebraic functions, but I don't know why they are communicating what they are. So kind of going back to, yeah, we're doing it. We're doing a lot of rigorous math, but we're going deep and we're challenging our students to communicate with each other and with themselves and find other avenues of thought to be able to do that much more successfully, so that when they go to Algebra 1, it's not like, well, I rushed through pre-algebra and I kind of know some stuff and maybe I'll struggle through maybe memorizing some things in geometry and trigonometry and calculus. It's saying, no, we want to provide you the opportunity to really know it, to think deeply about it, and to come away being able to teach someone else or communicate how this thing works. I know it's very conceptual, for the information that I'm giving you. So if you have particular questions, make sure to jot them down. But that has been our philosophical approach to how we communicate. Yeah, the 7th graders do pre-algebra, and it's very successful in supporting that transition into a similar Dulciani curriculum with algebra 1. So then we have our history curriculum. Now the 6th graders are finishing up our core knowledge curriculum. And that's a curriculum that goes back to the basics of Western thought. And of course, we study all different cultures and heritages around the world and different theologies. But this idea of unapologetically saying, we do prioritize Western thought because of who we are as Americans and the democracy in America, and making sure that we provide the historical context and the cultural relevance to come away with an understanding of who we are as Americans, and validating, yes, cultural diversity as Westerners do from ancient Greece and Rome, but understanding there is a baseline of foundational information as we as humans that transcend our ethnicity or our culture or our religious beliefs, that we as humans can connect on a factual level of content that we can discuss. Now, the 7th graders go into more specific. Nope, sorry, I want to go back to 6th grade and kind of tell you some of the things that they learn. So they study ancient Greece and Rome, the French Revolution, Romanticism, Industrial Revolution, immigration, industrialization, urbanization. So very similar things that you would find in a normal history program, not a social studies program, but a history program, but within this context of learning from our past so that we can make positive decisions in the future. Now in 7th grade, it goes much more specific into 2 core content areas that they cycle throughout the high school classes. One, this idea of being Texans, which is really important to us in Texas, and having a very structured Texas history program because it's rich in culture and it's rich in history, but also studying the ancient. So studying the Middle Ages, the medieval ages, with respect to our Western heritage coming from ancient Greece and Rome, and following that throughout democracy in America. So again, specific questions, make sure to note those down. So continuing in that, our science program. So 6th grade, similar to our math program, which is very foundational in preparing them for pre-algebra, the 6th grade science program digs very deep into the philosophical nature of science. So kindergarten through 5th grade still does core knowledge, very similar to history, and they do a lot of experimentation and reflection. 6th grade dives deep into, okay, we've got this stuff, we've got this content, we've got these skills, we've seen science in the observation aspect and the discussion aspect. What is the nature of science from an academic perspective? How do we come to this philosophy of learning and knowing about the world, doing direct observations and discussing it before we get into the particulars? And of course, we do particulars. So there's life science in 7th grade, we have physical science and biology and earth science as the students go up through that program. So establishing a nature of science and the philosophy of science prior to getting into a little bit more differentiation. And the 7th graders will do a little bit of that nature of science as well. Because again, we can't assume that they're going to come in ready with this understanding of why we're doing this particular thing and then going into the particulars about it. But 6th grade is a really good wrap up before diving into a lot of specificity in the middle school and the high school. And then we have our specials classes. So each day students will have 2 40-minute specials classes. Maybe on Monday they'll have PE and music, and then on Tuesday they'll have art and foreign language. And they'll rotate back and forth like that. And you might be wondering about Latin. So all of our students are going to come in not necessarily having any Latin instruction previously, and that's okay. And both 6th grade and 7th grade will go back to the foundations of Latin 1. We very quickly help the 7th graders transition into Latin 2 in 8th grade. But this idea of we do Latin because it's good, because it's hard, because it stretches our students to seeing the world in a different way. And it's very culturally represented. Where does this language come from? How does it help us know information within grammar and writing, of course, and translations? But this stretching of the mind in a different way than we probably have ever asked our students to do allows us to be very successful in thinking about things in this way and challenging us to have 2 languages that we're translating back and forth and we're communicating about reality. Really stretches students to be able to continue in foreign language instructions should they so desire. But again, we very much support our students in this because we know it's brand new. So going back to what do our students need to know and how do we, as efficiently as possible, take them along that journey towards success. And once we go through our Latin program in 8th and 9th grade, students then have the opportunity to choose either between an ancient language, continuing to study of ancient language, or of a modern language. So some of our campuses do continue in Latin, or they do Greek, or they do Hebrew, and some go to French and German, or continue in Spanish, which the younger students will do a full immersion Spanish, even at Great Hearts Arlington. It's 6th and 7th grade where they start Latin. But again, all of our specials areas are within this context of classical education. So PE, it's not just about playing sports and learning about football, which those things are great, but learning fine motor skills and gross motor skills and understanding that our bodies are an important part of us in reality. And how do we take care of ourselves well? And how do we move well? And yes, how do we win and lose with compassion and confidence and collegiality? How do we work together? And so this idea of it not just being sports and it not just being playtime, but it being very intentional and fun, of course, and collaborative, but within the respect of the larger umbrella of classical education, even in PE. And we'll speak a little bit more about extracurriculars and sports at the end, but music and art are very similar, where we are trying to put the better stuff in front of our students. Yes, we want them to acquire content and skills, but we're doing it in a way that is more morally forming, because we fundamentally believe that everything we put in front of our students is either drawing them toward virtue or drawing them toward vice. And we want to put the best stuff in front of them. Classical works of art and music, and of course they learn theory and they learn rhythm, and in art they learn line, form, texture, value, ratio, proportion, and they're creating, but all within the context of seeing ourselves as something part of something greater. So not putting a mirror in front of our students and saying, create something that's already inside you. No, we're saying like we're going to pour into you the stuff that is outside of you so that you can continue to become more than what you currently are, so that you can get to the point where you are ready to say, yeah, I've been filled with a lot of good stuff. Now good stuff can come out. And if they want to study economics or law or medicine or music or art, that they have this foundational understanding of who they are and how they seek out information and how they can do that once they're ready. So I want to go over a schedule, kind of a day in the life of both the 6th and the 7th grader. Now, this is a 6th grade schedule, but I'm going to talk a little bit about 7th grade as well, because the only difference is that the 7th graders, it being a middle school, will have 6 55-minute periods. They'll come at the same time, but they'll go to each of their classes. They'll, science for 55 minutes, they'll have 5 minutes of transition, then they'll go to history. Within there, they might have art or music or PE. Within there, they'll have lunch and recess the same, but theirs is much more structured to 55 minutes, 5-minute transition time, 55 minutes, whereas a 6th grade is more of the homeroom model. So I'm going to talk through that. And of course, write down your questions so I can address them. But the students start coming to school at 7:15 a.m. So between 7:15 and 7:45, students are being dropped off at school and they go to their homeroom class, even in 7th grade. The teacher is welcoming them, helping them to get unpacked, turn their homework in, get ready for the day ahead. That will start at 7:45. At 7:45, we do pledge to the American flag and the Texas flag. We take attendance. It would be at that point that if a student is opting for school lunch, that they would communicate that with their teacher, that we'd communicate that with our lunchroom staff so that they can be in preparation for that. And then these 6th graders, they go straight into their English language arts portion, which is grammar and writing and reading groups all together during that good chunk of time prior to going into literature. And like I said before, literature is a group activity where we're studying and discussing something together. Now you'll see following that, on a red day, they go to art, and on a blue day, they have Latin. So that's how we just color code them. So maybe Monday is a red day and Tuesday is a blue day, so that we cycle back and forth and we have equity in those specials classes as well. Then they have a little transition time at this grade level. Maybe that's bathroom break or a little snack time prior to going to recess. Now, all of our grade levels have recess, even the middle school and high school. It looks different. They're probably not going to play in the same ways as younger students on the playground, but we need to provide them time to unstructured time to just be with one another, to hang out, to talk, to chat, to have some free time, so that when we're in the classroom, it's pretty structured. We're doing something very intentional together. It's loving and it's joy-filled and it's fun, but it is structured. So continuing within our literature block, maybe that would be a time that they would do some reading groups depending on the day. But there's a good chunk of the day that's language arts and literature focused because it has grammar and writing and reading groups. The 6th graders do phonics and that literature study of the grade books. Now, at this particular grade level, they have a Lyceum time, which is a flex time. Now, every grade level has Lyceum, and that just means during that time, students might be getting additional support dependent on their need. So everyone's doing some different things during that Lyceum. Some students might get ESL support, some might get math intervention or reading intervention, they might get OT or speech. The students in the classroom might be getting help with their homework or doing extension activities or just being supported by their grade level teachers. So that way, all students are receiving what they need during that flex time without a stigma of I always get pulled out during art or I always get pulled out during music. Like, no, those are core instructional times that we don't want students to miss out on. So we provide this Lyceum, this flex time, so that students can get additional support that's needed. Following that, it looks like they have a little transition time as well before doing some more literature. And then dependent on the day for this 6th grade class, they might do history one day and science another day. Dependent on the unit, they might try to squeeze in both history and science every day a little bit at a time, or do history on one day and science on another day. Some grade levels in K through 6 will do a whole unit on history together every day before transitioning into science. Because of the instructional minutes for our lower school, kindergarten through 6th grade, that's the way that it works out really well. And they have some time to study poetry, and it's part of our writing and our analysis, like dissecting grammar and language within the poetry aspect, but also just delving into loving beautiful language. And they recite poetry, and some of the poems they'll be asked to memorize and recite to their classmates. And then they go to either PE or music, depending on the day. And then they'll come back for a big chunk of math. So they'll deep dive into math. They do practice fact fluency because we think that's something that we should continually practice, not withholding this idea of we need to understand why those things are doing what they're doing. So going back to how does multiplication and division work prior to, yeah, and now you know, and you should probably memorize it because that'll make you really effective and efficient in pre-algebra and algebra. Now, at the end of the day, while they're packing up, there's just some flex time so that students can enjoy beautiful works of literature. So this is not academic. Teachers might be just reading it to the class to say, like, let's get some more wonderful stuff, but not within an academic sense, because they've done a lot of that throughout the day. As the students are packing up, they're getting their homework ready, their planners, their agendas, their binders, prior to 3:30, where we start to release them to their cars. And they wait in the classroom, and we've got this carpool lineup that calls students from their classroom when their cars are ready. So there's no just waiting around. We want to use every instructional minute appropriately, so that the students in the classroom, they might be reading a book, or they might be starting to work on their homework as they're waiting to get picked up. Now at 4 o'clock, unless students have tutoring or extracurricular opportunities, they would go to Athenaeum. And Athenaeum is just our after-school program where it's enrichment. Now the 6th graders and 7th graders, we call it something slightly different. We call it homework club. And that allows them to get targeted intervention and support. And now, of course, they're with their grade level classes, and they get to hang out, and they get to be collaborative, and they get to talk together and work together. But that provides us with the opportunity to meet the community's needs. Like, I can't pick up my child right between 3:30 and 4. I work. So they would go to homework club where they get to be with their classmates and continue working. Now, with respect to that after school stuff, we do a lot of clubs and extracurriculars and tutoring for free. Tutoring is free of charge. If a student needs academic intervention or accommodation, we would communicate that very quickly with you and say, hey, we're going to start doing, I don't know, phonics tutoring or math tutoring on Tuesdays after school. Could you pick them up later? And oftentimes our families are very appreciative of that, because maybe other programs charge them for tutoring, or it's a little like pulling teeth to get these extra stuff. But we, within our academic day with our teachers, say we need to provide support to these students outside of the class day, really targeted intervention. Now, as we come into this new academic year, especially with the 6th and 7th graders, we want to provide opportunities for a lot of community engagement. And that necessitates conversations around extracurriculars and clubs. Now, when we get to the point within the first quarter of saying what are our clubs and extracurricular opportunities, we rely heavily on community engagement and our teachers, because we have a lot of intentionality of the culture that we're creating at our school. And if we outsource either extracurricular opportunities or coaches or bringing in people that we haven't necessarily vetted within the culture of our school, that can be risky. So once we run clubs, whether it be, every campus does it slightly different, robotics or Lego or STEM or Greek mythology or Frisbee golf or whatever students are really interested in, our teachers would provide that opportunity to say, hey, what do our students, our scholars, what are they interested in? And let's start running a weekly club for that. That would be for a slight additional fee so that we can pay our teachers to stay after school and do those clubs. Now, when we're talking about sports, that would be slightly different, because as we develop our sports program at Great Hearts Arlington, again, it's very teacher and student driven. And dependent on those 6th and 7th graders who are really interested in doing something specific, we want to make sure that we are ready and willing to offer that. So we've had a lot of discussion on what's low-hanging fruit, what could be really easy to build community around in developing our sports program. We've talked a lot about cross country and track, because that doesn't necessitate a lot of gear or space or equipment, and we have a lot of teacher and faculty already interested in running those programs. But once we mature, 8th and 9th grade, and we have a lot of interest for basketball and baseball and softball and volleyball and soccer. Some of our campuses do wrestling, some do 9-man tackle football. But there is this idea of us wanting to start very well and not stretching ourselves too thin at this beginning year. Now, we're going to partner a lot this first year with the community and with the YMCA, even for the younger kids. Like, who is interested in doing this for summer programs and throughout the year? Who wants to coach and be Great Hearts teams, and slightly outsourcing that for facilities until we have the numbers and the budget and athletic directors to run full programs of middle school sports and high school sports. So this idea of saying, yeah, we really want to do that and we're really excited about it, and not saying we're going to do all of it year one with 6th and 7th graders, but making sure that we are developing those student athletes and the culture that we want to create, and making sure we're really intentional about what we're offering and when. So that's not a lot of detail about what this year holds with the extracurriculars and the sports, but at least a general philosophical idea around, yes, it's really important to us, and we want to do it well. So I'm going to stop now. We are at 11:40, and I want to just turn it over. As you've been putting your questions in the chat, as you've been thinking about things, I'm going to have Mrs. Garthune just ask you to share out any particular questions that you have.
All right, everyone. So I'm actually going to start by answering an easy question. I'll just start at the top. Ms. Lawhon, you had asked about grade-specific Facebook groups. That will most likely be an option for this year. We're going to let our parent service organization and room parents take the lead with that. So it probably will happen, and we'll communicate those once that's up and running. Evelyn, if you would mind unmuting, you had asked a question regarding 7th grade math and getting your student caught up. Feel free to come on.
Yes. So I think they kind of went, it was already explained about pre-algebra and kind of starting in that level and then kind of getting them caught up with algebra as a grade, as 8th grade goes on. So I think it's pretty straightforward as far as getting caught up. And then I think that Lyceum also explained the fact that if she is behind in that area or so, she can, get more help there as well. So
good. Yeah, that's exactly right. We're going to come in with the understanding that this needs to be foundational, and not assuming that students are ready to do that rigor, while also providing students who are ready to do that rigor with that opportunity, but providing accommodations and tutoring and support and Lyceum for, we'll have 1 or 2 math interventionists that are not classroom teachers, that are just focused on small group instruction, similar in reading, having a dyslexia specialist and a reading interventionist, because those are the key areas that are foundational to accessing science and history and music and all of those other things, being able to read fluently, comprehend, to understand, and basic foundational early numeracy. So having people on the campus that we know we can lean on to support our students in that process. That's really important to us. Great question.
Great. Thank you.
We had a question regarding recommended books for reading for fluency, especially for 6th and 7th grade, and if we will provide a summer reading list.
Ooh, it's a great question. Off the top of my head, I couldn't necessarily speak to what a student's individual reading capabilities are, but what I often do for those grade levels, which is a little bit different than like a 1st grader or a 2nd grader learning to read, is this very easy 5-finger rule. So if you pick up an adolescent literature book, which they're usually promoted at a Lexile level for around the particular grade level, on the back you can kind of see. But if you pick it up at the bookstore and the student reads 1 page, and if they don't know or can't read 5 or more words, then that book's too hard. Or on the opposite end, if they pick up, I don't know, Captain Underpants or a comic book that is pretty developmentally easy and they have no errors, then we'd say like, we need to challenge you a little bit more. So kind of, that's a very general way of saying text at a student's level should be in their, this fancy word, zone of proximal development, which is it should be challenging, but not frustrating. Shouldn't be too easy or too hard. Now, I can't necessarily recommend a particular book for a particular grade level without knowing more information about a student, but any book that a student would enjoy and be slightly challenged by is really, really great for supporting reading fluency.
Thank you. We had a question, should 7th graders practice cursive?
Nope. We're not going to require 7th graders to do any cursive. So 7th graders won't go back to phonics. 6th graders will, and they'll be challenged, and they'll have a great year of learning both mastery of manuscript and cursive handwriting. And then in 7th grade, the phonics and handwriting portion is dropped off, and it's just literature and composition. Now, of course, we always encourage our students to use their best handwriting and have it be legible, but it's much more on intellectual and moral habits in the middle school than content and skill habits with that respect. Good question.
All right, if Ms. Webster wants to come on, you had some questions regarding essay writing. Oh, Ms. Webster, can you unmute yourself?
Sorry, I did the space bar thing, but I guess that wasn't working. We do classical conversations, and so we've been doing IEW, and so the kids, and they're starting at 9, they learn to write 5-paragraph papers. So I just wondered, when do you introduce the IEW? I believe you said you guys do, and then when do they actually start writing essays, specifically 5-paragraph essays?
Yeah, so it's dependent on the developmental level of the student. All the way to 3rd grade, the students will be starting IEW with structure and style. So this idea of by 6th and 7th grade, they should be doing those things. At the same time, not assuming that a 6th grader or a 7th grader has gone through 3rd, 4th, 5th grade of IEW. So we kind of do both, where we say we need to make sure they can do keyword outlines and they can do dress ups and they have that style and structure ready to, at 5th and 6th and 7th grade, they're starting into essay writing. And it's very structured. I mean, if you've done IEW, you know what that looks like. But making sure that, again, that zone of proximal development, they need some stuff to then be challenged and to work on. Yeah,
Okay,
good question.
thank you.
And our next few questions are from Ms. Webster as well. You had some questions regarding our history program and then how we teach science and creation and all of that.
Yeah, so what I wondered, classical conversations, obviously a Christian classical program, so their take on science is a little bit different. So how do you guys approach science when it comes to things like evolution versus intelligent design?
Great question. So oftentimes we present both of those theories as logical academic theories, or dependent on the theory of that being a particular belief system. So similarly, in our history program, where we study lots of different theologies and lots of different cultures, and not necessarily pointing students toward this is the right belief system, but objectively giving them the tools necessary to seek that out, to say, yeah, there is objective reality. We don't necessarily know what that is. We would humbly assert that we are on this learning journey together. Here is what some people have decided about the origin of our species, based on this information. We don't go into it into much more detail than that. We say kind of go through that process and then study science objectively. Like, what do we actually see and what can we decide based on that information?
Okay, thank you. I cannot remember the other question I had.
I think it was I had written down a question about can students shower after PE?
Oh yeah, I was just wondering. Is there time for that, or do they just kind of jump right into the next thing?
There are locker rooms for changing. The showers are usually reserved for sports. But I'm sure if we looked at our schedule and that for the community became a necessity, we could discuss that. But we especially for the middle school, we try not to have that be a part of their schedule. There's lots of different issues with that.
I also wondered how long they had for lunch.
Let me pull it up. I think they try to do lunch and recess together for about 45 minutes. Let me pull up one of our others.
I think the other question around history was using core knowledge, which public schools use. What's different about your approach to teaching history?
Good question. Let me pull up this master schedule for lunch and recess. So lunch and 11:50 to 12:30 is at this other campus. So 40 minutes where they do lunch and recess together for the middle school. 6th grade might have it in 2 separate sections. It's always dependent on the schedule of the day and kind of rotating 700 kids through the recess space and the lunch space. But we'll be lucky that we have a multi-purpose room and a full gymnasium auditorium. So we'll be a lot more flexible with that. So the question around history and core knowledge. The classical idea behind this core information that E.D. Hirsch has kind of compiled into this historical study, this narrative, this content, is about presenting it as a story of our development as human beings, and not saying like, I'm removing myself from that conversation and saying like, those are just things that happened in the past and they are not relevant to me. Helping students to see beyond themselves, like, No, these are human beings in reality throughout the history of of the world. And what does that teach us about human nature? And how does that help us be better in the future? So on the outset, it's a lot of dates and stories and content and really rich stuff. But saying that should only necessitate the conversation behind who we are within this umbrella of holistic development. And I can't speak for other programs, but perhaps other programs dissect it down to just a body of knowledge, like memorize dates and information and content and stories, and don't have Socratic dialogue around how does that make me more than what I currently am? How do I take that information and continue to holistically develop?
And Shemaine, I wasn't clear on what you meant by public schools use it. Were you thinking Common Core and that's the same as core knowledge, or what was the comparison there?
Yeah, that might be. I think maybe I was confusing Common Core with core knowledge.
Sure.
And core knowledge is different than Common Core,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
No Common Core for us. Yeah.
These are great questions. I'll be throwing some links in the chat here in a minute where y'all can explore more about core knowledge and things like that. But Mr. Dunnick, Ms. Woodside had asked a question regarding qualified teachers for math. Ms. Woodside, would you mind unmuting and elaborating?
Sure, absolutely. So I just really enjoy hearing about how we're going to approach education in Great Hearts. So just in general, how are you guys approaching hiring teachers that are appropriate, and then, just a sheer number with a brand new school? Just kind of curious about that process.
Yeah,
thank you.
That is fantastic, because you're right. That's probably 90% of my time right now is having those conversations and finding the right people. And it's hard and it's good. And we don't handcuff ourselves to certified teachers. Being certified can be really good. It can also be bad. A teacher being certified in a particular progressive education model and having years of experience in a different way of thought can be really difficult, bringing them in and saying, like, no, we do things slightly different. And unless you are coachable and you have a growth mindset, that can be really difficult for some of those teachers, while also saying, like, yeah, certification is not a bad thing. So we have been scouring the world for the right people for your students, where it's much more about thinking deeply about who we are as human beings, like this philosophical ideal. And those people say, like, wow, that really resonates with me. And we are fantastic on training those people on how to be educational leaders in the classroom. So yeah, the majority of our lead teachers have very good experience in the classroom, maybe from private school or from other Catholic schools, or even at the collegiate level, and saying, yeah, you're going to come in and you're going to think deeply about this, and we're going to help you to do that really well. Now, our apprentice teachers who are going through that mentorship program, they might not have as much experience. They're probably not certified, but we kind of home grow our own teachers too as we continue to grow and expand. And it's much more important that we as a faculty think deeply about child development, and we love them and we bring that joy to our students. Now, particular to math, I think our older math teachers are like masters or graduate level mathematicians, whether it be in economics or mathematical educators that come with a very rich knowledge background. Similarly, we have a 6th grade history teacher who has her PhD in war studies. Yes, she's taught in the classroom before, but it's more of, do you have within you the capabilities of doing that? Are you a master in that content area? And can you grow to become an effective instructor in the classroom? That's particularly important in the 6th and 7th grade. A kindergarten teacher looks a little bit different than a 7th grade math teacher, but making sure that those things are considerations, and then we are frequently, like weekly or bi-weekly, providing them coaching and feedback and professional development to support what they're doing in the classroom. You might have heard that almost every Friday is an early release Friday. That's because we really intentionally push back on this time that we are together as a faculty with training and professional development and collaboration and coaching and living the intellectual life, so that we can create a community of teachers that can be sustained, rather than just like, it's really hard and I don't get feedback and I get burned out. You might have seen that in other public schools where the turnover is very high. We want to make sure that we're creating something that can stand the test of time, that has longevity. So that's kind of both of our finding the right people and then training them to do something very intentional and specific.
Great, thank you. That was very informative.
All right, for the sake of time, I'll combine our last two questions. We had some questions regarding 7th grade Latin. Well, which editions of the Latin books are we using? And then say we had a 7th grader who was already taking Latin before they came to our school, but what are their options in terms of language?
Sure. So we do Cambridge Latin 1 for both 6th and 7th grade. Now for a mature campus, it would usually be 6th grade is Latin 1 and 7th grade is Latin 2. So what we're most likely going to do, dependent on the community of learners in 7th grade, is try to very quickly have them go through Latin 1. Now our wonderful PhD teacher who's going to be teaching Latin, he's very good at supporting all of the students in that. And I think there are opportunities for students who do have a foundation of Latin to be challenged in different ways, or to be in a collaborative environment that they would continue to discuss and support their grade level peers. I would say we do that in everything, in math and history and science and literature, because there's always a spectrum of development. Even thinking about Spanish in 4th grade, there might be 4th graders who come in, never learned Spanish, and it's immersion Spanish. And then we have a lot of Hispanic speaking communities. So how do we bring in culture and perspective and dialogue and translation to support the breadth of our students? So I don't foresee that being difficult, but of course, once we get through that process, if it is not challenging enough, I would love to continue that conversation about what can we do to support all of our students, both low students and both high students. Good question.
If there are any other questions, please raise your hand or come off mute. We did have some questions regarding learning specific instruments in music class. Do you want to elaborate on that?
I think I saw your answer, and I think that's the best the answer about additional clubs after school or extracurriculars, which we've done. We've school plays and drama and theater and choir. And someone said bagpipe. Like, yeah, we've done a lot of that at all of our vast different campuses. However, this idea of a core canon of instruction for all students K-12, which necessitates a very foundational program of continued education, that when they come out of it, they're ready to differentiate. They're ready to go into, like I said before, law or music or the STEM programs, but saying like there's a foundational body of knowledge that we're bringing all of our students through so that they're able to do the things that they want to do that are outside of that program. And even during our school program saying like, yeah, if we've got teachers and students excited to learn different things in an after school program or club or extracurricular, we oftentimes do that because we think it's important. It's not just like, what do people want and catering to people's choices, but saying we want to invest in our community and collaborate in specific ways, may it be outside of the classroom, due to the necessity of our core canon of curricula.
All right, well, if there are no other questions, we want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to stop the recording and you're free to leave, or if you think of other questions, let us know.